Welcome to That's High Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast. I am your co-host, Captain Nostalgia.
And I am your other co-host, Matthew Basil.
And this is episode 3, where we are talking about Rumblefish from 1983. And if you guys are new to our show, our Nicolas Cage podcast is just a little bit differently than every other one. All of the movies that are curated for this podcast come courtesy of Victims and Villains patrons at the $5 tier. If you guys are don't know what Victims and Villains is, it is a nonprofit that gets mental health resources into schools and teaches and educates individuals through pop culture. And this is a spinoff from that program. So you guys can check the links in the descriptions below. It's patreon.com/victims and villains. But let's get into this, man. I have been so excited to talk about this movie. I had never heard of this movie until the patron in question had chosen this, and I was like, all right. And I think we were in the same boat for this one, where we were kind of skeptical of it, because it's just like a no-name. Kind of like a random thing from the 80s. And then you get into kind of the cast of this. Nicolas Cage, Matt-Dillion, Lawrence Fishburne, Diane-lane, Mickey-Rourke, and it's directed by the same director of The Godfather 1 and 2. I mean, this is such an impressive feat. And so before we get into talking about spoilers, Matt, what were some of your takeaways? What did you like about this movie, or did you not like about this movie?
I liked the performances that all the actors gave, I should say. I mean, all the characters were really, really deep and really profound on there. I was really impressed. I mean, honestly, I know this has big names, but Matt-Dillion, I hadn't seen a lot of him. I mean, There's Something About Mary is probably the movie that first comes to mind that I've seen him in. So I really, Mickey-Rourke, I saw Sin City. I know there was a lot of talk about him coming back, out of retirement, kind of getting back into movies. But I mean, I was like, who's this guy Mickey-Rourke that everyone's talking about when Sin City came out? So I did not have a lot of like, oh, okay, these are names I recognize. But when I was watching the movie, I was just really like, wow, these guys really are hitting it out of the park here. But that really stuck with me. And the look of the film, the black and white threw me at first. I kind of, like you said, never heard of this film, saw black and white. I'm not against black and white. I went to film school. I watched a lot of black and white films. I can, I have some faves. I'm not against it. But like I said, whenever I see that, I'm like, well, are you doing it for a reason, or are you just doing it to be artsy, And this movie, though, really has a look and a feel to it. It's very stylistic. It follows the kind of German expressionist style, which deals with exaggerated composition, oblique angles, shadows, and smoke. They used a lot of handheld cameras. I mean, this was back in 1983, before that was really a thing. So it definitely has a look and a feel. I'm not really a huge fan of German expressionist styles, but I do think it worked in this film. It was a little distracting at times for me personally, but again, this film really. I honestly watched this film at 5 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, to be perfectly honest. I woke up, I had a busy weekend, and I knew I needed to watch this for the show, and I was just like, you know what, I'm up. I'm probably not going to fall back asleep. Let me just watch this film and just get it through. And it just worked. I mean, just as the sun rised watching this film, because it is just such a heavy kind of transient experience. So those things really stuck with me, the mood and the performances.
I'm so jealous that you got to watch this as the sun rose. Man, this movie floored me. This movie, I have not seen a Nicolas Cage movie this good since we've covered Mandy back in like 2018, and this movie, I mean, it left me speechless. Just how it's stunning. The cinematography in this is beautiful. Like you're talking about the expressionism, the symbolism that this movie brings, and it's such a different coming of age story that comes out of the 80s. And the 80s were like the age of that like weird like coming of age stories where you had things like The Goonies, Stand By Me, Lost Boys, and just so many other now iconic movies. And this is a film that really I know you haven't seen it or even read it, but another Matt-Dillon film that came out right around this time was The Outsiders, which is another coming of age story, and he played the older brother in this one. And this movie reminded me so much of The Outsiders. It made me want to go back and revisit the book. It was one of my favorite books growing up. I mean, but this movie, I think really what helps it just is so impressive about this film is, like you're saying, like it's the visuals, the performances, the symbolism. But for me, I think it's a coming of age film that is just blunt. And it's been a long time since I feel like I've been impressed by a film just by its bluntness and its just fearlessness in its storytelling. And Rumblefish had that in spades.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned The Outsiders. I came across this after I watched film when I was looking into Rumblefish, but there's a reason it reminds me of The Outsiders. I mean, they're linked. They're both The Outsiders and Rumblefish were originally books written by the same author, se-Hinton. Francis Ford Coppola actually received a letter from school children in the Midwest who were fans of his, asking him to do a movie version of The Outsiders because that was their favorite book. And so he agreed to do it and started working with se-Hinton. And he was so drawn to Rumblefish because it mirrored his own relationship with his brother so much for him that he decided to do the two movies back to back. And basically, so that's why there's so much cast, that shares both The Outsiders and Rumblefish. That's why they are so similar. Obviously, they come from the same author. se-Hinton co-wrote them both with Francis Ford Coppola, who obviously directed both of them. So there's definitely a link. So if you are a fan of The Outsiders and listening to this, it is highly recommended that you check out Rumblefish if you have not.
And also, Matt, you should probably also check out The Outsiders.
It is now on the top of my list after watching Rumblefish. It's been on my list for a long time. A lot of people have recommended it to me, but after watching Rumblefish and reading about all the connections between The Outsiders and Rumblefish, I'm like, all right, I need to just buckle down and find this movie and just sit down and watch it. Maybe as the sun rises again.
It's ironic, too, that se-Hinton is the author of both of these books because they both are like the brothers. The brother from The Outsiders is called Ponyboy, and then you have the brother from this movie is called the Motorcycle Boy. Right. So I just kind of thought that was funny, but let's get into spoilers. So if you guys haven't seen Rumblefish now, it is available for rent wherever you guys get your movies from. We rented it through Fandango. It's also available on Amazon, iTunes, and just a number of other. So wherever you guys get your movies from, go check it out. I mean, this movie just has so much, and I think the relationship that I want to start with talking about is specifically the dynamic between Dylan and Rourke, where you have this almost kind of like mythological figure of Motorcycle Boy that Mickey-Rourke plays, who is the older brother to Matt Dillon's Rusty James, and he's like, my brother can do no wrong, and like everyone else kind of sees his brother for like, who he really is. Like he's like this like delinquent, like he has cops following him everywhere he comes around, and it's kind of one of those relationships where you have this like idealistic version of someone that they're like trying to live up to. And so, like, you know, Dylan, it's never established in the film, but we're pretty sure he goes to high school. Is that, can we agree on that?
Yeah, I think because there's actually supposedly a cut scene where the gym teacher, you know, bribes him to beat up a kid. And, you know, there is a very short scene where he's in school, but he's fantasizing about his girlfriend. So I took it he was in high school, but he kind of is one of those dropouts where he just kind of like, because the principal suspends him, but he's hardly ever there. I take it. He's just kind of one of those like people who shows up when he feels like it.
And Rusty's a really unique character, and we'll talk about him, but the dynamic between his brother and him, he just really wants to be like his brother. And, like, I don't know. Like, it's interesting because I feel like when you meet me and then you meet, like, my parents and, like, my sister, like, I'm nothing like them. It's really weird to kind of see like the dichotomy. Like I have traits of my mother and my father both, but like the just family for me is like such a weird anomaly because like I've made choices in my life that don't necessarily reflect what others in my family believe and stuff along those lines. And so you know, you really have to come to a point in your life where you are becoming your own man and where you're becoming your own individual person. And Rusty James throughout the course of this movie is trying to just be like his brother. Like he doesn't want to be his own person. He just wants to be like his brother. And I think also at the same time, he also just wants to be seen and also wants to be heard. So he's a really complex character overall.
Yeah, Matt Dillon did an amazing job with this character. I love the tagline of this film that, you know, says, it says Rusty James can't live up to his brother's reputation. His brother can't live it down. Because I think the way I took it was that his mother basically picked up and left. It's talked about that when she left, she took his older brother, the motorcycle boy, that's all he's known as throughout the film. She took him, but she kind of left Rusty James behind. So he was kind of like the black sheep, the outcast. He was the leftover. And, you know, the father basically has like a breakdown when she leaves and never recovers from it, is still just drinking away his emotions. He's basically an alcoholic, not quite the damaging alcoholic we saw in Joe, but, you know, definitely an alcoholic who just really drinks away the day. And, you know, so Rusty James kind of, I think, looked at his brother, who was this gang leader who ruled the city, you know, or at least that's what we're led to believe. This whole movie takes place after his brother kind of left and the gangs fell apart. But I think he just kind of idolized his brother as this hero, as this person who took charge of life, who everyone looked up to and respected, and, you know, wasn't afraid of anything. And so he just kind of saw him as this archetypal hero, which I personally can relate to so well. I mean, you know, I always was, you know, growing up looking towards other people to be that leader that I could follow. And I think he just wants to be that way. And when his brother kind of packs up and leaves, he wants to try to be like him, but he's not him. And that's why I think he can't live up to his brother's reputation. And then the other part of that tagline, his brother can't live it down. His brother, I think, reacted to the family life and what happened, you know, by being basically a rebel without a cause, and just got into trouble, got into fights, just looked towards, kind of conquering and violent ways to express his pent-up anger, his pent-up emotions, his pent-up rage about what happened to his family life, about being neglected and being on his own. And so, and he never was able, he's not able to heal from that. So it's just such an interesting dynamic between these two brothers and how they're both trying to look for, you know, healing in different ways. And I think that was what really drew me into this movie. I mean, it's been done before in similar ways, I can recall in films, but this one I think really just was very raw and very kind of in your face and very very interesting.
So this is going to be kind of really reading into the movie and the relationships a lot, especially the home dynamic between Rusty James, his father, and Motorcycle Boy, where something you were just talking about, how he turned to violence. I would say that probably their home life, because they mention in the movie that the mother leaves right as Motorcycle Boy was no more than like 2 or 3. Like Rusty James had just been born, and so like here you have this father that's turning to alcohol pretty severely, and when we do see him, he's the first few scenes we see of him, like he's just passed out drunk. And so you have to imagine that that's a normal occurrence in there. So here you have this, older brother that has to fill a parental figure for this younger brother. And so it's kind of like, I'm going to, I'm still a teenager at heart, and I have to express this in some way, shape, or form. And so I'm going to build this reputation, and then eventually that reputation you find is just not satisfying. And so you set out to go discover yourself. You look for your sense of identity, your sense of purpose, and that's really the place where we meet him, Motorcycle Boy, throughout the entire course of this movie. And he has like some of my favorite just like monologues throughout the course of this movie, just because you see how damaged and how weighted this life has been for him, and he has been neglected, but also at the same time, like he's also had to like outpour love when he doesn't have anything to fill up his own love. And so he has this broken cycle of just not being a decent person, it's this cycle, it's this broken cycle that he's trying to escape, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, as great as Matt-Dillion was, and like I said, he was great, it was Mickey-Rourke that really drew me in. That was the character that I just was glued to the screen whenever he was on screen. And I think you're right, his approach to the role, he stated, was as an actor who no longer finds his work interesting. And that was the definite feel that he had in this movie, was that he just did not find any fulfillment in his life. It was an empty candy almost, or an empty junk food that he was filling to try to fill this void. He was looking, and that's why I think I was able to identify with this character so much, more so than Matt-Dillion's character even, was because of this need that he was trying to find love and respect through achievement on the streets. Not that I was ever on the streets, thank goodness, but I understand the need to try to, try to find, a following, to fill a void that you're not getting from family life, from anywhere else, really. And so you end up getting very empty that way, because, his gang members probably just followed him just because they were looking for a good time or fear, or just because they were, didn't have anything better to do. It was an empty life. It caused a lot of friction, probably, because he comes back. He's, tormented by this one cop. I mean, it damaged him, and he was a broken man. He was always a broken man who was looking for some kind of someone to be probably the father and mother figure. That was. He says he went to California and he saw his mother. So that's, I think, clued you in that he's still looking for that love from a parent.
Yeah, and tormented, I feel like, is a bit of a exaggerated word for his relationship with the cop, but that's just how I interpret it. No, I think for his relationship in particular, just him as a character, he is someone that is, looking for that nourishment because he never had it, and you never realize how much difference something like affirmation can make in your life. How much, being told that you have value and that you have worth can really do to your outlook on life. And so when we meet Motorcycle Boy in like the end of the first act up until the time where he dies, he's just this depiction of like melancholy and depression rolled into a character personified. And he's just that way because, at that point you have to imagine he's got almost 2 decades of just being in this cycle of a loveless home, being forced to be in a role that he wasn't made for. And also on top of that, not really having the nourishment. He's going through a huge identity crisis. And I think that, identity matters more than we give it credit for. Identity is something that shapes us, and it's something that, Rusty struggles with so heavily throughout the course of this movie. And I went through, a lot of things myself as a teenager, as most people do, is you're trying to navigate your way through the world. But I've talked about it on Victims before, and I've talked about it in some of my writings for it. I lost a friend when I was 17, and I had just to suicide. I just got out of a really tough season of depression myself, so I'm like trying to understand like mental health and like identity and how the two are one and the same, and how they coexist in our lives. And I struggled many years in my identity, and it probably wasn't until maybe 6 months before I got married. And the day of this recording, I'm celebrating 7 years being married, that I truly understood like who I was as an individual, not where I came from, not like what I did, but like who I was as a person. And that's a long journey to take because there's so many factors that you have to factor in when you're making that search for identity. But you really have to kind of just do what Motorcycle Boy did. Just get on a, figuratively speaking, get on your Harley and just go for the coast and just search and find yourself and ask, what is it that makes you happy? What is it that makes you unhappy? Because when you're able to answer those two questions first, then the answers of starting to shape and mold you of who you're supposed to be day in and day out.
Yeah. First off, happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Yes. But second off, kudos to you to finding identity. That's something that I certainly struggle with. And so I know how hard that can be to find your identity, to find your true self. I had a friend several years ago who said to me, I was at a bar with him, and he said, you don't drink, you're a vegetarian, you're with me at happy hour at a bar. I appreciate the company, but obviously you're not doing what you like doing, and that was the first time somebody ever said that to me. Like, what do you want to do? Like, for fun, just even. So I came from years of not just going with what other people did and not knowing my own identity. And I know how difficult that is and how much I've struggled over the past few years to try to build my identity. And I'm still working on it. I'm actually just finished the first draft of a play about finding identity and trying to put the pieces together. So it was very fitting that I watched this movie, which deals so much with both Rusty James and the Motorcycle Boy struggling with their own identities and trying to come out of how other people see them, trying to come out of trying to be like somebody else, trying to be like what they think they should be, and find themselves. I don't think either one does it in the film, but I think Rusty James maybe has a shot at it at the end. That's kind of the hopeful last scene as he's at the beach that I found very haunting. But I think that that's such a struggle, and so many people, kind of go through the motions in life, and that gets such pushed aside, I think, a lot by people. People don't realize how difficult it is to find identity, because it's so easy to just glue onto whatever is pumped in through media, or whatever the people you work with, or the friends you grew up with, whatever identities they whatever your family thrust on you, whatever identities is put on you, it's so easy to just, okay, I'll take that, rather than find your true identity. And when you find your true identity, that's the only way to sanity, in my opinion.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now, and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. Or we downplay how important identity is, the same way that we downplay how crucial and how important mental health is. There's a scene in here between Patty and Rusty James where she says, "You're always trying to be like your brother." And a part of going through an identity crisis is navigating who you are that makes yourself happy, but also at the same time, forming your own opinion and being your own individual person away from it. Like you said, like media is a great example of how it shapes our opinions. And this is such a completely random example, but when I first started, doing written reviews for victims, and one of the things that I was like, I want to do movie reviews because I love movies. Movies have been a mental health outlet for me since I was 8, and they've been a cornerstone to my life. And so I was following and reading, reviews and Rotten Tomatoes, and like I had people that like I always listened to, and they were kind of like my voice of reason of like, am I going to check out this movie? Am I not? And so I really started to lose my own identity as a cinephile and really started living vicariously through other people. And if one critic that I trusted didn't like a movie, my mind somehow also aligned with that, even if I, didn't necessarily like that. And, I've since gone back, and now when I do stuff like I just don't read reviews. I don't watch trailers. Because I want to make up my own mind. Like I want to know, like, why do I like this movie or why do I not like this movie? And it's such a small example, but it's also not playing into other people's expectations as well is also another part of identity, because it's so easy to get wrapped up into what people think, or what you're supposed to think or what you're supposed to do. And it's so easy to get wrapped up into those that we kind of lose ourselves in that, and media is such a tricky slope to be there, because we're constantly projecting influencers every day, or influencing us in how we think and how we should be. Oh, if you have these pair of Nikes, or if you have this this new game console, or these certain pair of headphones, or if you wear this brand of tracksuit, then you'll be happy. And it's no. Eventually, those styles and those game consoles, they're going to be outdated, and you're still stuck with them. Are you taking identity in them?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You are so bombarded with how you're supposed to be. I mean, just from society, family, friends, coworkers, media. It's hard to know who you truly are. And I agree with you. Mental illness and knowing identity go hand in hand. Absolutely. That's the cornerstone, because when you know yourself, you be yourself. You can better weather what storms come in life when you know yourself, and you project better into the world, because you project this unique example of human expression into the world. We as humans are more unique than we are alike. There are base things that are alike. We obviously all desire love. We all desire joy. We want to avoid pain, suffering. Those things are there. We want to love. There is compassion, I believe, and innate in every human. But we all have such a unique lens that all filters through. And when we compromise that unique lens, we're compromising our experience in this life. And it completely can shatter us, as it did for these two characters in this movie.
Also, the older I get, the more that I realize how environment plays into things like mental health and identity. And there comes a point where you're going to be the way that you are because of the environment that you're around. So if you're around a really toxic environment, you're going to be a toxic person 9 times out of 10. And you're going to think the way that the individuals in the household that you are, whether that's family, friends, or just loved ones, and there comes a time where Steve actually turns to Rusty James and says, why do you drink so much? And Rusty's like, I don't always drink. And this to me, like, it commented about how you have this cycle of violence this cycle of destruction that begins at home, because every time we see his father, he always has a drink in his mouth or in his hand. And there's an aside that we've previously alluded to between Motorcycle Boy and Rusty James, where both of them they were around a drunk, neglect father the entire time. And so you're going to see something like that and repeat it.
Yeah, absolutely. Your environment influences you. I mean, it's where you get your nourishment. It's where you reflect yourself from. And, if you are reflected in a dirty mirror, it's going to come back as a dirty reflection. So you definitely have to be mindful of your environment. And this movie definitely had a very toxic environment. That was what was presented. Like I said, the city is very dark and ominous that they live in. I don't know if they ever say what city it is. It might just be an ominous city. The people around there, it feels very claustrophobic. At least that's the feeling I got. Just these people, they're very aggressive around them, and it's just they're all around each other, and it just feels very like like you just feel like you're being smothered. And like obviously the family life, the drunk father, the violence, everybody seems to be out to get you. It's just there's 2 major fight scenes, I believe, if I remember correctly, with like street violence in there. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. But let me just say real quick, just from a technical cinephile standpoint, these fights are extraordinarily staged well.
Yes.
So well.
Yes.
But continue. I digress.
Yes, they are. In fact, the first fight sequence was done, I believe, choreographed by a ballet instructor, like he owned his own ballet studio. So yes, they're great fight scenes as far as as far as cinematography and choreography. I don't know why I can't speak today, but yeah, it just the whole thing gives a feel of a very toxic environment. I think that's why, spoiler alert at the end, basically, Motorcycle Boy tells Rusty James, take my motorcycle and follow the river until you get to the ocean. And that's, that's how the movie ends, because Motorcycle Boy basically antagonizes the cop to shoot him. That's why I said it was tormented, because the cop shoots him for stealing fish. But, but anyway, so that's how it ends. Because I think that's a little exaggerated. Obviously, the cop had it in for him. But I guess the Motorcycle Boy didn't seem very fazed by the cops, so I guess there's worse. But anyway, the whole, speaking of fish, that's the whole core symbolism. Rumblefish is the title of the movie, and the final sequences of the movie are about rumblefish. And basically, there's a scene where they talk. It's the only thing in color is the rumblefish in this black and white film, and it's there's a scene where the two brothers talk about rumblefish and how they'll fight their own reflection till they die. And so, I mean, that's what they're doing. These two brothers are fighting themselves. They're struggling to find their own identities, and they're fighting the identities that are thrust upon them. Either they thrust it upon themselves, or it's thrust upon by other people, or it's, some combination of it. And again, that's where destruction will come about. I use that word. I think that's so apt in this case. Like I said, I've struggled with identity. And I had a long struggle with identity, and I think I'm winning it, but I got to tell you, it's a rough tumble, and it's can really mess you up.
Sure, identities is a hard thing to really nail down, and I don't want to just sound holier than thou, because I'm comfortable in my identity. I still have those days where I struggle. It's just I would never consider myself depressed, but I still undergo depression, kind of thing. And I think you're absolutely right. The symbolism of the rumblefish really does enhance the dichotomy of the relationship between these two characters and the entire arcs that they end up going through. It kind of also goes back to that Harvey Dent line from Dark Knight: you either live long enough to see yourself become the villain, or you die a hero. I said that backwards, but
close enough. We got
close enough. And like you said, in the end, Motorcycle Boy ends up dying, and it's alluded to that instead of kind of finding his own identity, Rusty James kind of has this fresh start where he just takes up the mantle of Motorcycle Boy, which is kind of what I thought. But there's another scene in here particularly too where Patty's not in the movie very long. She's played by a very young Diane-Lane, and she is stunning, just say the least. But
she's 18. Be careful, Aaron. She's 18 in the movie. So.
Oh. I mean, she's aged very well.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But anyways, there's a scene where they go and Rusty James and all of his crew have this party, and it's this weird orgy scene. It's the weirdest scene in the entire movie. But he ends up cheating on her, and she finds out. And I wrote down in my notes, toxic families create toxic relationships. And the idea of that toxicity is you never see it because you're blind to it. You think because of, that toxicity runs in your family, you think that something like that is normal. And so you're going to carry that normalcy into other relationships. And he does. He ends up taking it into his relationship with Patty, and it ends up costing him his relationship with her. And then as they're breaking up, he has the audacity to say, "What did I do?" And this mentality of creating toxic relationships, it also yields this victim mentality that you can never see past your own garbage. You can never see past your own toxicity because you've been around it so long that you've been desensitized to it, and it's also at a point where it's now normal in your life.
Yeah. First, before I can comment on that, I just want to cycle back. It's very interesting that you saw the ending differently. You saw it almost as a defeat of Rusty James, that he ended up taking on the mantle of his brother and becoming his brother and repeating that cycle. I thought it was interesting because I saw it differently. I saw that he got out and he got a chance to live free at the end, or a potentiality. So that was kind of interesting.
I would argue that he never finds himself. His entire journey throughout the course of the film is never to find himself. And so the idea that because his brother is now lost, he's just going to take up his mantle. Like, that was kind of how I read into that, because, if you don't understand your own identity, it's really easy, instead of, weeding through all your own stuff, it's really easy just to take up someone else's identity.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as I think I said that earlier in the program, I mean, yeah, it's just so much easier to just adopt somebody else's identity or just go along with what somebody else projects on you. I mean, that's the easy road, but it's not the best road, certainly. But yeah, no, I just found it interesting that's two different interpretations. It shows you how kind of in depth this movie is, and how much it really is high art, I would call it, because there is so much that you could take from it and interpret and read into it. And as far as the scene with Patty, yeah, I kind of lost a lot of it. I mean, I realized what was going on eventually, but I was just like, when Patty and Rusty have the argument, Rusty James basically he acts like it didn't happen. You almost kind of like, wait, was that a dream sequence? Like you kind of like, wait, we saw him, have sex with this other woman and cheat. And he literally, like, he gaslights her, basically. I mean, he basically literally plays it off as that did not happen. There is no reality. It's completely untrue. It's not like he was in another state of mind when that happened, or it was a dream sequence. It's not till a few scenes later, when he has the scene with Nicolas Cage, that character, that Smokey, that he actually kind of admits that he does know that he did cheat on her, that he did actually do it. That's kind of the first time that he actually acknowledges that is reality. So it shows how personalities that are, like you said, toxic and grow up in a toxic environment and feed off that toxicity can just warp reality and don't even see how much toxicity they're in. And that's when you really get lost. And that was the tragedy really of his breakup with Patty, because it was probably superficial in a way that like high school relationships tend to be. It was, sure. It was sexual. There wasn't a lot of deep conversation, but I do think she did really care for him. She did accept him as he was, when she was really, I think, the only character that accepted him as he was, Rusty James. And every other character saw him as a deadbeat, as an idiot, as, a troublemaker, as, just his brother's, brother stooge or whatever. And so it was a shame that relationship ended.
Well, yeah, you're right. Like, his identity in the movie is seen to other people is always Motorcycle Boy's younger brother. He never rises above that title, and so he's stuck in this cycle of bad home life, bad school life, kind of mediocre with friends, but also, now his brother's dead, so now it's just going to be easier for him just to take it up and go back to California like his brother originally did. And but you mentioned Nicolas Cage, and this is the Nicolas Cage podcast. So I feel like we have to talk about Smokey as a character. Not really a whole lot going on. This is back when Cage was still Nicholas Coppola, the cousin of the great director Francis Ford Coppola. And how did you feel about his performance in this movie?
I thought it was good. Again, like you said, it's a small part. I think there's maybe like 4 scenes, maybe even less than that he is in this movie. He does not play a huge role in the story arc. He basically, spoiler, I mean, he's supposed to be a friend or a follower of Rusty James' kind of little hodgepodge gang, because he's seen as the younger brother of the motorcycle boy, but not as deft, not as smart, not as tough as him. So a kind of a lesser version of his brother. By everybody. So he kind of has these 2 or 3, gang members that, kind of follow him around. And Smokey, Nick Cage's character, is one of those people, but he kind of manipulates Rusty James in a way and sets him up because he's smart enough to kind of know that he has these toxic tendencies. So he kind of uses that to his advantage, Smokey does, and to get Patty, as his girl. And so that's really kind of his whole thing. And so it's kind of a betrayal to Rusty James. So I thought in that way he did a good job as being, basically just a friend who betrays Rusty James. But like I said, we're not seeing Nicolas Cage uncaged. We're not seeing his full, self in this, certainly. And it's certainly not one of his deeper performances. It's to me, it was a very kind of just, I'm going to come in here, I just got to kind of pinch hit, in this role just to kind of do one more sock to the main character, to stack one more chip up against him. And it's a low ball chip. I mean, it certainly, but it certainly affects Rusty James. And I kind of was like, oh, that's a shame, when that's cold when I saw it, because there's even the scene where Rusty James tries to be the bigger man and kind of shows that he does have some real strength in him when he just says, well, I cheated on her, treat her right, it's to you. And Smokey says, don't flatter yourself, kind of being like, I don't need your permission. You're not anything to me. You're not my leader. You're not my friend, so, and that was just really cold. So Nicolas Cage plays really a very cold deadbeat, in this movie, a really cold jerk, I guess, to put it nicely. And so in that way, he did a good job.
I would also say that Nicolas Cage's hair has more depth than he does in this movie.
Yes, his coif is quite epic. I would say that is the most
so big
standout. That is the most standout part of his performance in this movie. If you just want to see his hair, his coif there, it's Fonzie level. In all honesty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember Googling this film to find out where I could stream it. So I was kind of curious. I was like, oh, it's a black and white film. And so I Googled Rumblefish Nicolas Cage and was not disappointed by the fact that Nick Cage has like an additional 6 inches added to the top of his hair for this movie.
Oh, that's so great. That makes me so happy to hear.
I think one of the things that I want to talk about in closing is Motorcycle Boy's journey of healing. We've kind of alluded to it earlier in the episode, but him in particular, he goes off to for 2 months to California to go visit his mother, who he hasn't seen. He just randomly comes across her and on television one night sees her, goes out to Cali for healing, and I think, for him, it was kind of cathartic to meet his birth mother and his biological mother, and to then, kind of coming back home was almost kind of, would you say that his journey of coming back home was kind of like to let that healing begin, or to see if, it truly lasted?
I took it very differently than you. I had a different interpretation of his journey. That's why I guess I saw the ending differently too, because he makes the statement. There's a conversation he has with Rusty James when he shortly after he returns, and he asks him, "Did you see the ocean?" or something like that. And Motorcycle Boy says, "No, California got in the way." And so I took it as he was looking for healing. He did go out there for healing. The ocean represented healing for him, but he saw his mother and he couldn't deal with who she was, because she didn't have any remorse. This is what I read into it. I mean, it's not actually stated, but this is how I interpret it. She just didn't have any remorse. She didn't show him any actual love. I mean, he says she offered to take him into a home, but it was, she was with a movie producer. So I took it as she just has this high life and she just doesn't really care about him or his brother. And so he kind of saw it as a rejection of that he still couldn't find the love that he was looking for. And he had to return to his brother to try to basically try to save him before he basically hit the wall, was how I took that journey. So I took his return was not for healing, was to try to save his brother. That's why he tells him follow the river to the ocean. And that's why the ending scene where he does reach the ocean meant he was able to get his brother at least to the ocean, even though California got in the way for him.
But
that was how I interpret it.
He also makes the comment that she offered her to move in.
Yes.
Where, he could have had healing right then and there. And I think for him, he has this like deep rooted connection to his brother, Rusty James, that is, I mean, it's only like, it's like a brother and sister kind of, vibe that you can get. And for him, really wanting to have that healing and to feel like he belonged with his mother. Because I didn't take it as a necessary rejection. I took it as he basically needs to bring his brother back to there. He needs his brother to kind of have that closure that he's sought. And a part of that, being back home, I think he questioned a lot of the choices that he made. And so he was kind of like making amends and healing himself in the process of his home life, before kind of going off. And that to me, like, I went through a journey in my own life where I had a really bad, and I just talked about this in my Nobody review, but I, got involved with suicide prevention and mental health advocacy at like age 18, and I did it for a few years. And then I felt like I wasn't supposed to do it for anymore. And like, I just cut off all ties from like all the friends that I had made during those 3 years, just for a number of reasons. And a lot of that had to do with, just my own mentality. And I see a lot of that rejection mindset or not good enough mindset in Motorcycle Boy. When he returns home, he's kind of trying to make amends, but not necessarily knowing how to or where to start, I would argue.
Well, yeah, he's definitely, I think I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, the movie, spoiler alert again, the movie ends with him basically going into a pet store and literally taking all the animals out of the cages and just setting them free, like taking the birds and just letting them fly away, taking the guinea pigs out of their cages, letting the dogs loose out of the pet shop, and then taking these fish, the rumblefish, to the river to dump out. And that's when he gets shot by the cop. for breaking into the pet store, I guess stealing fish. Again, I don't know why that would warrant lethal force, but whatever. So it was meant for the movie arc, I guess, this character arc. But so I don't, and that's why I took it, he has this dialogue with his brother where he tells him about, being left alone. He says, that's why you can't deal with being left alone. And he has, another dialogue with his brother where Rusty James is kind of childhood friend who's kind of more the square character. The Richie Cunningham of this, greaser lifestyle, says, gangs weren't glory. They were horrible. Tell him that wasn't good. And he goes to the motorcycle boy and he says, tell your brother, tell him, that this wasn't a good lifestyle. This wasn't what he thinks it is. And he kind of admits that he found pleasure in it. He did find it fun, but it is an empty lifestyle. So I kind of took that as the fact that he was always finding emptiness. He couldn't fill the void in him. He was, finding kicks to try to hide from it, for periods, but it never lasted and it never truly filled him. And so that's why he felt trapped. And that's why he let the animals out of the cages, because it was symbolic of trying to find the freedom, and he could only find freedom in death. So it was kind of a suicide, basically. It was a suicide by cop, but it was a suicide at the end. That's at least how I interpreted it. But it was a suicide where he hopefully, and again, maybe I'm just reading into it because this is kind of similar to the play I was writing at the time. So, but it was a suicide, but to release his brother, through before he took his own life.
No, yeah, I think you're onto something there, but I think that is that's going to do it for us for talking about Rumblefish. Before we leave, is Rumblefish worthy of high praise or not?
Yes, I would say it's definitely worthy of high praise.
Yeah, I'm also going to say this film is worthy of every and all praise. I loved this movie so much. The performances, the style of it, the way that it's shot, the monologues, it's such a layered, beautiful, just love letter to the struggle for identity and so many deep themes. And I thank Francis Ford Coppola for making this movie and se-hinton for writing the book that I am now going to go hunt down and read. So who knows? Maybe we'll do like a Patreon exclusive where Matt shares his thoughts on The Outsiders and I'll share my thoughts on the book. We'll do like a book club episode. But
yes,
where can people find you online, sir?
People can find me online at Facebook. Matthew A. Basil is how you look me up, because there are a lot of Matthew Basils out there. So make sure you include the A. But I have a writing page on there, so you can look me up on Facebook. And that's pretty much the main spot to find me these days on social media.
All right, you guys can find me at Captain Nostalgia on Letterboxd. I am also, you guys can find our mother show, Victims and Villains, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Letterboxd as well. You guys can go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can find our main show, Victims and Villains, other episodes of That's High Praise, and other spin-off podcasts that we have done in the past as well, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. And we talked a lot about tonight about mental health and identity and stuff like that. This is the reason why Victims and Villains makes the content it does, so that you can know that you have value and that you have worth. So we want to encourage you guys in closing that if you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, please reach out. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this podcast recording, there are 130 suicides that take place each and every day, and when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, please consider reaching out to us, because
yes. Don't end up like the motorcycle boy is all I'm just saying. If you watch this movie, you don't want to end up like Mickey Rourke's character.
Yeah, because you, as a person, are worthy of high praise just for being in the world. So please, stay with us. And remember that you have value and that you have worth. Have a good day.